Hi, and welcome to Schmooze with Suz. I'm Suz Montgomery, your host, and welcome back. Boy, do I have a treat for you guys tonight. I am interviewing Tucker Smallwood. Now, Tucker is he's got a fascinating biography, but he's got such a great, rich, full history. And I was fortunate enough to see him with my husband when we went to see the Sunset Limited here in town at the Rubicon. We were walking out the back door of the theater because we were sitting in the front, and that was the exit closest to us. And he was walking out at the same time, and we complimented on his role. And then, of course, you know me, hey, you ever want to come on the show? So I asked him to, and I was very, very grateful he said yes. So Tucker, I read your biography numerous times. You are impressive. I am so honored that you came to Ventura from LA. Let's talk about your biography. You grew up in Washington. You were born in Washington, D.C.
That's right.
And you spent 2 years in Greece.
My father was a Fulbright professor, and he was an English professor at Howard University, and he won a Fulbright. And we lived in Greece for 2 years, where he taught English to Greek students at a university.
So you speak fluent Greek?
I spoke fluent Greek as a child. I have a minor in German. I spoke fluent Vietnamese once upon a time.
Why did you acquire the German? Where did that come from?
I went to college for 2 years in Munich.
Why did you choose Munich?
Well, my father was then a State Department official, USIA official in Regensburg. He was the director of the German-American Institute, later in Frankfurt. And I had, not officially, but essentially punched out of Antioch. I was very young when I went to college. I was very immature.
Too young, probably, huh?
Well, it would have done me some good probably to have taken a little time off and grown up a little, but I was away from home and I discovered girls and beer and poker. And
this was the 60s, right?
This was indeed the 60s. It was 1961.
Okay, so that explains it. So then you went from there, it looks like you went to Germany, then Maryland.
Well, the campus in Munich was supported by the University of Maryland. It was created for the dependents of State Department personnel, military personnel, spooks, and businessmen whose business kept them abroad. So all of their sons and daughters were allowed to come to a 2-year school to study, and these credits could be transferred to the University of Maryland.
So you were you traveled quite a bit, and your childhood is probably, moving from place to place. Did you form any good relationships that lasted, but it was hard to do?
No, not really. It was 2 years in Greece and then back to Washington, and then 2 years of college in Germany and back to Maryland. I always returned to that center near Washington, Maryland, Virginia. I had good relationships and good friendships, but I'm comfortable with a lot of different people in a lot of different contexts.
That's what I was going to ask you next, because that really afforded you the ability to move in and out of different groups of people and be able to relate to them on another level.
Yes.
Teachers do that as well, but you, and I want to get into your past, especially here. We'll get to that other part later. But you went to New York in '70 to study acting. Now, why did you do that?
Well, prior to moving to New York, I finished my years at the University of Maryland by coming to a space very much like this. I had an engineering scholarship at Antioch. I was studying international relations in Munich, and I wandered into a TV studio when I got back to the States and said, yes, that's what I would like to do. And I became very focused and purposeful, and I graduated with a degree in speech TV production. I was the first black director at WBAL, which was the NBC affiliate in Baltimore. And then I got drafted. And the next thing you knew, I was on my way to Fort Bragg for basic training in the Army. Now, I went through basic and AIT, and then because of my test scores and some personal qualities of assertiveness, I was invited to come to OCS, which is Officer Candidate Training School, and I was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the infantry. I stayed for 6 more months to train future lieutenants, and then they said, what would you like to do? Write your ticket. I said, I want jump school, I want ranger school, I want special warfare school, I want Vietnamese language training, and I do not want to work with Americans. They said, you got it. So I found myself eventually in the Mekong Delta with a 5-man American team. There were some days I didn't speak English. And I loved my work and I loved my people. And I was very good at it, but it was a very dangerous route. The 5 lieutenants before me had lasted 8 months total. I spent 5.5 months in the bush and 5.5 months in the hospital. I was pronounced dead in the jungle.
Oh my God.
And once I got out of Walter Reed, I extended for 3 more months, and I taught young lieutenants at Fort Belvoir in Virginia how to survive in the jungle, how to patrol. And then I came to New York. I had met with Sanford Meisner. I flew out here to UCLA and to see about getting a master's. And the man who was going to teach the program had been trained by Sandy Meisner. There were 3 seminal teachers of what we call the method, Stanislavski. Sanford Meisner, Stella Adler, and Lee Strasberg. I worked with all 3 of them. I came to New York, I studied acting, I got a job on a soap opera, Jeff Goldblum got a play, and we were kicked out within the same week. And my life went on from there, and I worked constantly. I worked in children's television, I did commercials, I did Broadway, I did off-Broadway, I did public affairs. I had an Emmy nomination for hosting a news magazine on CBS. And towards the 80s, as they came on, my wheels started to come off. And I didn't know it, but I was descending into depression, and I suffered for 8 years, very, very unhappy, until my friends who cared about me enough said, you need to talk to somebody, you're in trouble. And I found a doctor, Dr. Victor DeFazio, who took me in, and he said, I want to see you twice a week. I said, I can maybe afford to see you once or twice a month. I owe $250,000. I had become very self-destructive. He said, I want to see you twice a week. We'll square that away later. And Vic gave me back my life. Post-traumatic stress disorder wasn't even a term then.
No, that didn't come until
we
later.
knew what shell shock was. We knew what combat fatigue was. We knew what soldier's heart was. It is the most recent diagnosis, and it is a blight on the lives of our children. Our sons and our daughters are coming home troubled, and they know they're troubled, and they're asking for help, and the help isn't readily available. We know that because of the record mix-ups in Washington, people are waiting 2-3 years to have their claims dealt with. And the sad part about it is a lot of folks don't have the patience to wait through that, and every single day of the week, 22 veterans kill themselves every day. That's heartbreaking. From post-traumatic stress, from depression, from survivor guilt, from shame. There are a dozen maladies, but it all stems from doing something about which there's nothing normal. There's nothing normal about combat. Nothing. You can get good at it, but it makes it very difficult to reconcile living in normal society. And we have done things and been places we don't want you to know about. We don't want our parents or the people that love us to know about them. We talk about it with each other because we understand each other and we don't judge each other. But there's a problem in America, and it is these tens of thousands of kids coming home from Iraq and Afghanistan who are troubled. And they're going to stay troubled. And they have wives and parents and children and brothers and sisters and neighbors and friends and employees and employers. And every one of these people touches all of those lives. So we got to do a better job. That's all there is to it.
During the Second World War, they called it shell shock?
Yes.
And what's
well,
the other
actually,
term?
I think it was shell shock. It could have been. I think it was shell shock actually in the First World War. It was soldier's heart in the Civil War. Combat
Soldier's
fatigue.
heart.
Yes, they're all talking about the same thing. You have seen stuff and you can't let it go. Those pictures cannot be erased. They are embedded in our DNA. And as I say, I got some wonderful therapy, and I've been medicated for the last 8 years.
And that
The
helps.
VA is throwing medicine at these kids, but it's not a cure. It helps. It's a tool. You have to be able to talk to someone. You can't shrink yourself. Your mind is too nimble and clever for that. You have to have someone that you can trust, that you can confide your troubles to, and let him tell you, yes, that makes sense. No, that doesn't make sense. You're kidding yourself about that. Yes, I understand that.
Are there specialists that deal with PTSD?
Absolutely. I am a board member of the Soldiers Project, and we have a network of psychiatrists across the country who give free, confidential counseling to troubled veterans and to their loved ones, open-ended, as long as it takes.
Now, is that for any war?
No, this is for the veterans of Afghanistan and Iraq.
Correct.
We've got our plate full right now. There are people from my generation still struggling, those that are still here.
Thinking.
There are people from World War II in Korea. The culture was different then. Those men came back from the hell they had seen and put it in the closet and shut the door.
I had a student like that. He did the same thing. He never wanted to talk about it. It was a very small occurrence. He would sit outside in a wheelchair outside my classroom and listen to me teach. He waited for me one day and he goes, I need to talk to you. And he says, I want to bring you something and it means a lot to me. He goes, I've never shown this to my family. About a week later, he comes into my classroom in the wheelchair with a small shoebox. And in this, it was wrapped in duct tape. I mean, this thing was, nobody could get into this thing. And he says, I had my son go up in the rafters of my house and get this down to bring to you. Apparently, he was on a team that went into Okinawa, and he was sent in there with the mission to kill. That was his job. And he apparently wiped out, exterminated a family, and blindly, as he's running out the door to escape, and the house was starting to burn, he grabbed this little blue vase. I still have this. And he gave this to me years ago, and he wanted to give me this vase. He goes, this means something to me. And I go, Bob, does this mean you're letting it go? And he says, I never thought about that. He says, I think you need to have this. And I said, why do you want me to have this? He goes, I don't need it anymore. From that day forward, he was in my class for, I would say, close to 5 years, 5 days a week. And I think there's something, and my classroom is like probably what you've experienced. It's a free, open forum for people to talk. And granted I teach, but it's also probably part therapy. And I'm not a therapist, but I listen well, and I ask important questions. But he felt this was his harbor. You thankfully found somebody, your Dr. Vic, that was your harbor. And this is in this nonprofit that you are involved with. I read about this in the Soldiers Project, and this woman founded it, I believe it was?
Dr. Judith Broder, she's in her late 70s now. She started it in 2004.
What motivated her?
She was ready to retire and travel the world with her husband. They wanted to do the Silk Road and see the world, and she went to see a play in Los Angeles. And it was monologues written by soldiers who had served in Afghanistan and Iraq. And it broke her heart. These men were saying how ashamed they were, how broken they were, how unhappy they were. They could never be normal again. They could never live among decent people. And she says, that's not right. I have to try to do something.
My God.
And she stayed up all night and came up with this plan. I will call my colleagues who have done well in life and are willing to give something back. And she created this network of caregivers in 4 or 5 different locations across the country. And we field requests. I am a resource because I am a spokesman for PTSD. I have prominence because of a minor level of celebrity. And
I wouldn't say minor.
It's minor compared to what real celebrity is, and believe me, I have more than I need. But my point is, I am invited to fundraising events. I am invited to speak. at veterans galas and gatherings, and I speak about post-traumatic stress disorder. I am the poster child. People know my face from my work, and I can say to them, my name is Tucker Smallwood, and I live with post-traumatic stress disorder. I function rather well. I have quality of life, but I am so lucky because when I finally got the courage to ask for help, and it takes a lot of courage. It's the hardest thing for us to do. We are wired to drive on, suck it up and drive on. We are infantry. Our motto is follow me. To ask for help it almost is a betrayal of our credo. But we need help. And when that veteran finally gets to that point where his wife is going to leave him, his children are afraid of him, he can't keep a job, he can't pay a mortgage because his mind doesn't work. He is emotionally upset, and it means sometimes you can't sleep because we're afraid of our dreams. It means we become very hyper. We are hyper vigilant because that kind of vigilance kept us alive. When you go to a crowded place, I couldn't shop for Christmas for years after Vietnam. You can't watch all those people, and you have to know where they all are because any one of them could try to kill you. And that's what kept you alive. But it doesn't work very good in the civilian world. And it's very uncomfortable for you and for the people around you. So my point is, we know that there are people who are troubled. They're coming back as they out-process and say, I need to talk to someone. I've got some issues. I went for 10 years thinking, I have no business. I've been playing on house money since 1969. I was pronounced dead. There's no medical reason for me to be talking to you right now. I went out on a mission with 6 mercenaries to kill someone, and we were betrayed, and every man was dead or dying. And I was the only man on that mission who could speak English. And I was bleeding out. My carotid artery was severed. And I knew if I passed out, then we all died because I had the radio and no one was going to come for us unless I called it in.
Do you think you were saved for this?
Oh,
do you think,
I don't know whether I was saved for this, but I was saved for something.
To be able to relate this story, to be able to help other people.
I hope, if that is my purpose, I am grateful and feel validated. I am happy to do it.
Pay it forward, pass it on.
Yes, yes.
How'd you come into acting after this? Now you went. You went through this period of this, and it's not really recovery because you'll never be fully recovered, correct?
That's right.
So you went through this period, and this was years later.
1980 to 1988. That's 10 years after I was home. I spent months in a bed in Walter Reed Hospital, and they did not expect me to live very long because the people with my injuries, there's no track records. They don't live. So they said, when I asked them, what have I got? Maybe 5 years. We don't know.
Really?
Yeah. And they were being candid with me. My records are medical history, or they were then. It was absurd that I survived what I did. I should be rather dumb. The right side of my brain was without a supply for almost an hour. It took me 20 minutes just to get a response on the radio.
Oh, you're eloquent, Tucker. I mean, you are very well spoken. When we saw you on stage, I mean, I didn't even want to breathe. I mean, that doesn't happen to me too often. My husband is an actor. I know a lot of actors. I watch a lot of theater. I'm not often captivated. I walked out of there feeling I was shell-shocked because of your performance. It was so profound.
Thank you. And the prose of Cormac McCarthy.
Maybe so,
Brilliant
but you
prose.
made Cormac McCarthy come to life.
Thank you.
And you acted with a very well-known
Joe Spano,
another Italian. But Joe Spano, I remember from the old Hill Street Blues days. And I'm not saying anything, that would, injure Joe's, probably his ego, but you overshadowed by your power. I mean, you have a certain power about you. And I don't know if that came from all the, experiences you've had in your life, but you put everything you had into this role. It was a powerfully moving play, but you made it come alive for me. I mean, when we walked out of there, it was just like, I couldn't breathe.
I am incredibly well trained, and I've been doing this for 40 years. And I have always played at 100%. I don't know how to sort of do things. If I do it, I do it fully.
Do you think a lot of this is just raw emotion from where you came from and what you experienced that goes into your acting?
One of the things I loved so much about studying acting was it brought me alive. I had been shut down for years. I was a commander. You can't have all that emotion going on and do your work. So I was suck it up and drive on. I can remember coming to my Jeep one day. I hadn't been there in weeks. I lived on a river. You could only get there by helicopter or boat. But I kept a Jeep near a town, and there was water on the floorboards. And I looked in, and I pulled out my carbine and blew a hole through the floorboards. And the water drained out. I missed the fuel line by about an inch. That's how cut and dried things were in my world. Deal with it. Move on.
Black and white.
That's right. Dead or alive.
Life and death, yeah.
Yeah. And so when Sandy Meisner, one day in class, a few weeks into the year, he said, "You're watching yourself." And I said, "Well, yeah, I know. Why do you do that?" I said, "I don't want to hurt anybody." And he said, "We're not going to let you hurt anybody." And it was such a sweet thing, because he had no idea what I was capable of. But he taught me to trust myself, that I could be appropriate. I could be full of rage, and I was not going to hurt the person I was working with. I broke a couple of chairs, maybe a door, but I never hurt anybody. One day he said to me, "I want you to sing something." And so I chose Fire and Rain by James Taylor. And in the middle of the second verse, I just broke down sobbing. And he taught me how to access this wellspring of life and feeling that I have inside of me, that I had been suppressing for so many years. And I fell in love with feeling. That's how I knew I'd really been reborn. I could feel.
Do you get lost in your roles? Do you
I
become
try
that
to.
person?
I try to.
Because you embodied that character where I didn't know where you stopped and where he took off. My husband can do this. We did a play about 5 years ago, and we do it every year. We do love letters for my students. And I only had, of all the times we've performed this, there's only been maybe 1 or 2 times that at the end of the play, I lose it. And I'm not supposed to lose it. I mean, I just, all of a sudden, I wasn't me. And is that what happens to you?
If you're lucky.
So that's when you know.
That's why we do it. It's not for the money, it's not for the glory.
It was scary, Tucker.
Well, what can I tell you?
I think maybe is it the loss of control that I felt?
I don't think you were out of control. I think you were attuned to what you were doing, and you were just maybe a little intimidated by it being so pure. But that's why a lot of us do it. It's heightened reality.
I'll leave it to you guys. It's a little too scary for me to go there again. I mean, we're doing it again in a couple weeks, but it's so powerful. It's such a powerful emotion.
I have described acting as the most immediate thing I've known since combat. There is something about being on a stage and seeing the curtain go up, or being in front of a camera and hearing the phrase, "Speed, rolling, action." And it's like standing in the door of a helicopter or an airplane getting ready to jump out. It is be here now.
Do you get scared?
It's the immediacy.
Are you scared when that
Not
happens?
scared. It's the immediacy. You are engaged fully. And that's what I love about acting, and that's what combat is. That's why life is black and white after war. War is technicolor. There is nothing so intense and immediate as combat. And we can tell you how wretched and awful it is, but if we're telling the truth, we also tell you it's the most exquisite time of our lives.
That's a very powerful statement.
You can become an adrenaline junkie. Michael Herr, who wrote Dispatches, articulated that. And I loved reading it because I'd always been in conflict about it. I knew how awful it was, more than most people, but I also knew how exquisite it was. You lived or died on my word. My word was law for about 30 miles. That is power uncommon to a young officer.
I don't know how you did it.
I did it because that's what had to be done. And when it was over, somebody else got to do it. Now, that happened on September 14th. My license plate say September 14th. For years, a couple of weeks before September, in late August, I'd start having nightmares. I'd start smelling the jungle, smelling death, smelling fear. And on that day, I would be in a locked room in a corner with the lights out, sobbing. I used to call it my annual PMS. I went a little crazy every year. And it was scary, but once The 15th came, I was as good as gold. I was like brand new. It's called anniversary syndrome. People who have been through, it's a real phenomenon.
I've never heard this.
People who have been raped in terrible accidents, in war, that have had a traumatic event happen to them, tend to relive it every year at that time. That's what happens at 9/11 survivors. It's a real thing. I didn't know what it was, but I knew I had no choice but to go with it. It was going to happen to me. And so now, 40 years later, I can go to Machu Picchu, I can work, I can travel. I'm okay now. I understand it. But for those first 10 or 15 or 20 years, it was rough going.
Okay, I just got the word that we're running out of time, and I lose time with you here. I'm sorry. The Soldiers Project. I want to get your plug in for the Soldiers Project because this could save lives.
Yes, it could.
It does save lives.
Yes, it does.
So at the end of the show, I'm sure on the screen the guys are going to put down where they can get a hold of the organization, and I assume it's a nonprofit organization.
It is a 501c3. We could use your money, but more importantly, we could use people knowing about it. You might want to refer a family friend, a neighbor, someone from church. It might be the difference between keeping that young man or woman alive. They deserve help. And it's thesoldiersproject.org. If you go online, you will find it.
Send them some money, folks. And also, please try to get involved by spreading the word. My favorite things are vets. Anybody that knows me, I'm a huge fan of veterans. I have a lot of World War II veterans in my classes. I have boys from Afghanistan. Like I said to you before, my oldest was 107. I even had World War I vets. I mean, I've had everybody in my class, and they're unique individuals. They have special gifts, but I want to keep the dialogue going. I want people to keep it going about the way that we treat our veterans is not acceptable. I'm sorry. And that sounds really unpatriotic, but we need to do a better job. We need to take care of these people coming home. Your project is a facet of that. It is mental health, not physical health, but it is mental health that is probably more dramatic and more necessary to take care of somebody's little psyche than it does about a wound. The wounds heal, but yours never heal, really, do they?
I've got lots of zippers on my body, but I recovered from my physical injuries fairly well.
You look pretty darn good to me, kid.
I'll be 70 next month.
You are? Mm-hmm. You look great. You're fit. Do you work out?
Not if I can help it.
Oh, okay. Well, Tucker, thank you for being here from the bottom of my heart and from our audience at home. Hopefully you will get a hold of the Soldiers Project. Send them money if you can't get a hold of them to have them speak. But Tucker, thank you so much for sharing your life today. This is even better than I thought it was going to be. Thank you, honey.
Suz.
Thank you for being here. And thanks for being here, and we'll see you next week.